Welcome to the Connected Campus podcast, where we explore the ways that diverse professionals are working every day to optimize their efforts to recruit, retain, and graduate their students.
I'm excited for our conversation today with a person that I've known of and known their work for a while, and a company that I've admired from afar for a while. So excited to have a conversation, explore kind of our guest's background and the work that Modern Campus does as an organization. So we'll start as we always do. If you want to introduce yourself, Andy, and kind of just give your intro and brief professional background of how you got to be where you are today.
Yeah, and good to see you again, Dustin. I'm really excited to be here and for this conversation today. My name is Andy Gould. I'm a VP of product at Modern Campus. My my background has been a very fun journey. I like to say it's been one of those 0 to 1 things. I was a pretty non-traditional student. I graduated high school in absentia with a 1.9 GPA, which I shouldn't be proud of, but I'm only proud of it because of what's happened after, right? I ended up in bouncing around in a bunch of different jobs that I found in a newspaper. I sold speakers out of the back of a van on the streets of Boston for a while. Don't recommend that one. Don't buy them or do that job. Worked landscaping, retail, all that, and went to undergrad ultimately when I was 25. So at the time, I really I knew the value of my education. And I got into everything, super involved in all of it, great grades, and really enjoyed it. Obviously, I ended up in student government and leading clubs, and I found a lot of problems really quickly. That was in Florida, of course, where student government has too much money and too much power, and thus is like a little House of Cards episode. So I saw a lot of challenges with engaging students and using money wisely and articulating the outcome of the co-curricular experience specifically. And ended up joining Presence as I was graduating during its founding years. I hit the road. I ended up door-to-dooring it. So I'd just go to a city for a few days and just show up to schools and be like, do you want to buy this? Do you like this? And ultimately ended up working. Some people signed on, and the rest is history. I built the sales and marketing and partnerships teams at Presence over the last decade or so. Helped craft the product offering a lot. And we merged with Modern Campus a year and a half ago, I think. I spent some time working on overall platform strategy through some of our acquisitions and our additions. And I'm now heading up the product division over the Presence product. So I oversee everything related to Presence and its place in Modern Campus and all of its operations, and I get to interface and collaborate with others that are in a similar capacity.
Yeah, and we sort of encountered each other. Like, I knew of Presence first, and then Modern Campus has certainly been ascendant in the past few years, and you joining them has been really great to see. But if it kind of behooves you, I guess, because I don't your expertise, I guess, mostly in your background being with Presence, if you want to sort of explain kind of what Modern Campus is as an organization, and then kind of your work with Presence and what that focuses on as well, since that's kind of more in your wheelhouse.
Yeah, sure. I think ascendant is definitely the right word. Modern Campus has gone through some pretty amazing growth over the past few years and now boasts over 2,000 clients in the higher ed space. And I would say, I think the best way to explain it is that Modern was intentionally built to sustain and propel, the learner life cycle, right? So we talk about learner to earner a lot, and how that isn't just a one directional thing. So I would say that we've put together a suite of solutions that um, are in the most important and impactful and cutting edge and of worthy of attention areas of higher ed right now. So attracting students, engaging and retaining them, and then keeping them connected to the institution for life, so that it's not just a one-time experience getting your degree, right? It's all about lifelong learning. So there are Modern is a suite of solutions, everything from the only purpose-built CMS for higher education, so a tool that runs your website, that involves personalization and other technologies like that students are looking for, helps attract prospective students. We offer conversational and behavioral text messaging technology, right, that helps engage and re-engage students and reach them where they are. we have I'd say the largest offering and most substantial offering of really powerful and robust catalog and curriculum and scheduling tools. Um, we're also, of course, in the co-curricular space and offer presence and other tool sets that go along with presence, which is all about student involvement, skill development, really helping provide like not only the academics but the total student experience and show the value and importance of that. And then we also offer the top continuing education and workforce development technologies out there in the market, which are very large scale, almost like mini student information systems, but for the continuing ed space, which is where a lot of schools are making their money, right? And is what we're seeing higher ed move toward, which is credentialing, micro-credentialing, that whole line of work. And, you know, all those tools are brought together to power the same goals, which are increasing enrollment, retention, brand loyalty for higher ed, right? Helping them tell their story, and ultimately student employability.
And I think what's interesting, yeah, like you said, like it could seem like very disparate, separate things, but they're all kind of really focused on, achieving uh, the same goal, singular, or like the same kind of life cycle goals, and that sort of like kind of cyclical uh, sort of engagement that an institution would have with students across their entire life and everything. So I think focusing in, and especially just with your sort of background, it's kind of that like engagement piece. So, the student is already there. They're likely going to, be a student there for, maybe 4 to 6 years getting their undergraduate degree, or, it could be, a longer time as they get subsequent degrees or come back or any of those sort of things. But like, the approaches that you all have with things like the, texting and like different the student involvement, co-curricular, like all these things that sort of create this kind of ecosystem. From your perspective, like what makes this work so critical for institutions like right now? Because I think a lot of people would understand like, oh, these are things that yes, we should be trying to strive towards, but like we're in a moment right now that I think it makes them especially important. And I'm curious, like from your perspective, like why that is.
Yeah, I like to call it out. I think higher ed is on its heels at the moment. I think that we're always a little bit late, as sort of is the nature of the thing, and we all know that. But um, the world has been changing more and more quickly as time has gone on since the invention of the internet and before then. And I think that especially with the given economic situation of this generation, previous generations, I'm an elder millennial, right? So I certainly grew up hearing. I can't believe I said elder. I grew up hearing, go to college, get degree equals job equals more money equals success. And that used to be the formula, and it was very simple, and it no longer is. Right now, we see entry level positions that want 5 years of experience and a master's degree, which is unreasonable. So there's the saturation, I think, of the bachelor's degree and of higher ed, and thusly there's the questioning of what the point and the value of it is. Bring along technology where you have decentralized education that's available for everyone. I mean, you can go get a degree from Harvard, even though it's not official. You can take the whole thing online, no problem. Right. So I think it leaves schools in this like super unexpected space of how do we show our worth and value and compete and behave, frankly, a little bit more like a business, which we're not used to and haven't had to do before, and maybe don't even have the institutional competencies to be able to do. Right? Maybe we don't even know what the solution is. Right. So it just puts a microscope on the entire student experience, and I think it's really hard to put ourselves in the position of what it's like to be a young person right now in a world where the climate is dying and wars are happening and people aren't getting appropriate wages, right? Like there's a lot going on. And we say, hey, just come get your degree. It's going to be fine. Take out debt. It's going to be easy. It's going to get a good job. Thusly, I think there are institutions that are being successful with this and institutions that are struggling with it, right? Like showing our value and why us over our neighbor. It's a big problem and a big question, and so I think a lot of them look toward technology to help solve those problems.
Right. And like, because I want to keep like repeating these words across like different conversations, just showing how like important they are as like relevance and differentiation. That idea where it's like,
Mhm.
there's a lot of ways to, show that value, in terms of program offerings or just, support structures or whatever. And really leaning in so that it's like, here's how we're unique versus like, and I think I always forget the phrasing of the term, but it's like an economic thing where like everything in a certain like business becomes like the same. You've got like Nike and Reebok are kind of the same. That it's like Applebee's and
Yeah.
TGF. Like there's just sort of this like weird sort of amorphous kind of thing that starts to happen where it's like you just stumble into whatever, and it's like, well, yeah, you kind of succeed just by like kind of mirroring what everybody else is doing. But I think the competitiveness of higher ed, you'll definitely see kind of the winners, making the really clear value propositions and you know showcasing their uniqueness versus just like carbon copying whatever their neighbor is doing or something. So um
Yeah.
and yeah, and thankfully, yeah, there's not like just one silver bullet. I get like it's not like if everybody just does this thing, it's going to work. But it's like, I guess in this space, it's like there's kind of like standard tools or best practices, but then like how you use them can really be like adaptable or sort of flexible, in terms of like, oh, we're like a smaller, private college out in the woods versus like an urban, campus and, public, private, all these sort of things. So, yeah, so I think there's just an interesting thing where there's maybe the uh, kind of the bounds of the sandbox are very clear, but then like how you're kind of playing in it, you know, that's kind of the beauty again, where there's like the creativity can come into this sort of this issue of kind of engaging the students and everything. So, um,
Yeah.
so yeah.
Yeah. It's tough. Like I think it's really difficult because technology is looked at as a fix in and of itself, and tool is the right word, right? Like there's a whole bunch of different things you can use to accomplish your goals, but just buying technology doesn't really do it. You need institutional leadership, and you need strong strategy, and it needs to stay really, really, really consistent. And you're right to think about relevance. Um, Students want to know what the point is and what they're getting out of it because they're paying a lot of money, right? And it can't just be like education can't be the answer. It's more than that. You get educated to do something. Otherwise, we'd have a national policy of open and free education for everybody, because that would be the point. But it's not. So there's a really cool book out there called, it's a sales book we used to train our teams with, To Sell is Human, by a guy named Daniel Pink, famous dude who wrote a book called Drive, which is all about motivation. But he talks about a word called movement, and he pushes on salespeople to ignore the idea of transaction. Like you have to win and they have to lose. It's more about indicating the concept of movement. Like you're here, you'd like to be here. This is the way in which you get there. And that to me is the whole concept of higher ed, right? Like you're 18, you need to do something with yourself. You'd like to be making money and changing the world and having an impact and being fulfilled. This is the way in which you get there. And it can't just be pay us and come to campus, right? Like it's got to be the details.
Mm-hmm. Well, and yeah, like the idea of, I think another sort of part of the byproduct of going to college is like building your community and that sort of like that idea of like how do we create structures or sort of spaces or opportunities that are accessible whether you're on campus or not, for you to like go through this experience and have sort of your your mentors, your near peers, your colleagues of people that you're going to go to for advice about life and business and whatever else. But like yeah, like it, because I, like in my mind it's like that's why you've had I think increased demand for even just like completely asynchronous online courses and degrees, because like at a certain point people are like, well, if I'm just going to pay to be like in person and that's essentially what I'm getting, I'll pay far less to just like do it from home and get the credential and go about kind of my life that way. But so yeah, I think like it does kind of segue to what I want to ask next, because like I think to an extent a lot of people would be like, I completely agree with like, the tools and the things that we need to do to maintain relevance and differentiate whatever. But like, institutions, are going to be slower on the uptake or whatever, just like, because, they're venerable institutions, been around for, hundreds of years at times. So, what do you see as some of like the struggles that they're facing implementing these strategies, and maybe how you've seen them kind of overcome them? Because I think, uh, like a lot of people might be like, oh, that's such a cool tool, I'd love to use that, but I don't know, like it never work here or what, so it's like you kind of have to maybe try to work with them to break through that, very kind of like fixed mindset. So I guess just your perspective on that, like on the struggles and how institutions can overcome them.
Yeah, that fixed mindset, that for sure. I would say culture is the one that I'd identify as the main one, and it generally comes from the top, and it can be commanded a little bit, which I think possibly it needs to be. I see an attitude in a lot of higher ed of like we're what we're doing has value. It doesn't need to change, and students are lucky to be here, right? And that's now quite clearly behind the times, and so there's this resistance to the fact that higher ed has become a marketplace super quickly, and that students view it as a product to pay for, and themselves as consumers. Students expect to be courted. They expect things to be personalized for them. They expect to have their data captured, measured, and used to give them a better experience, right? Just like Amazon or anybody else does with their interactions. That's what's happening in 99% of their life. And then they go to this relatively antiquated experience in some cases in higher ed, and that's where the breakdown happens. I think that like the major struggle I see is that institutional priority and strategy around adapting to these changes is really important. And higher ed has a tendency to have folks that are just a little bit behind the times, and in their positions for a long time. And that's not necessarily bad, but it makes their challenge even larger. That continuing education for them, staying with the times and becoming technologically a technological expert, I would say, I couldn't find another word for that, is huge, right? And it is the charge. I've seen a lot of institutions where a lot of my experience over the years was literally just picking up the phone and calling people. I measured, and I hit about 30,000 phone calls at a point. Yeah, right. And I've spoken with, I don't know, at least 2,500 institutions, if not more, over the years, just personally, just calling around, talking to different people, poking around, seeing what's going on. Obviously, do you want to buy my stuff? Granted, was the crux, but a lot of it was, what are the challenges you're having, and does this fit in with those? And the difference between institutions who knew what I was talking about and were current on, hey, this is a conversation we're having. We care about this. We want to solve this. Okay, let's talk. And institutions who are like, nah, we don't really want to do anything with this. Like, this isn't important, not a priority, not what we're thinking about. We're kind of busy. That difference was huge, right? In who those institutions were and what their general challenges were, what their retention rates were, the way in which their brands, were identified by students and such. And so a long diatribe to say that I think that culture generally from the top down, but can be from the bottom up too, on adjusting the way in which higher ed thinks about itself and operates is the biggest struggle, and the ones that get that culture right are the most successful and will continue to be.
Yeah, my brain thought of like just because I think a lot in like metaphors and parallels and whatever. Like, it's like the idea of like, I've been in therapy for much of my, adult life, started in college, and I've like gone through with it consistently, where like I've also started to really, think of it this way and encourage other people to think of it as well, where it's like, go to therapy like once a month when things are like good, when you're like fine, because it's just sort of like you're being proactive to build sort of the like capacity and sort of coping skills to handle life's challenges. Cause like, there will always be stuff coming up, versus like, I am in crisis mode. And certainly there's a lot of resources that are out there where it's like, I need immediate assistance. I'm, kind of drowning here. And like institutions sometimes are like that, where it's like, oh, we're drowning because we're just, hemorrhaging students and all that. We need ways to try to retain and engage them or whatever. And that's sometimes going to be fruitful ground to, make change with. But like, yeah, there's institutions where culturally they're like, we're in a pretty good place. Like, we've got maybe, some resources and people and all that. And like, people get it. So it's like, what's next? Like continuous improvement. Let's keep this, good times rolling versus like, everything's on fire and we're trying to like, just survive. Uh, yeah, like that's the cultural thing. And more often it is going to come from, I mean, even like the president or at least just sort of like, a head of a student affairs, head of academic affairs, or head of departments and stuff like that, where they're just sort of making it clear they want to stay current, yeah, and like on the tools that are out there. And I'm sure it was at least like, because yeah, maybe you had like a lot of, literal or figurative doors sort of slammed in your face. But even just if somebody was like, I'll see what you're doing. Yeah, give me a demo. It's like, cool. That's at least like you're building your awareness. And that's maybe like a seed that is harvested down the road where they're like, yeah, put a little, germ in their head of like, that's something that's out there when like they just kind of had like an itch they couldn't scratch. And it's like, oh, that's right. There's like, we could kind of come at this from a different way. So like, yeah, because I think as much as like being in kind of like a crisis situation is like we need to make change, we're doing it now, and we certainly saw the potential of that during the pandemic. But it's kind of like that shouldn't be what it takes to make a change happen. So like that's kind of like that juxtaposition where it's like, yeah, like on one hand when things are good, people are almost going to take the wrong lesson from that and just be like, yeah, we could sit back and just sort of like just let the good times roll that way versus like let's take this window of opportunity to uh, kind of build on, I think, kind of the positive momentum and things. So,
Yeah, it's funny. Change is hard and it's tiring, right? And I think a lot of educators and people in education envision ourselves as innovators, and people who are pushing change and are on the front lines. And the reality is, it's a lot to do and requires a really relentless focus and tightly controlled culture. And it's not easy, right? It's a constantly changing and evolving philosophy and way to approach problems.
Yeah, I think that, yeah, like change management being kind of a cultural thing too, where like in terms of navigating, implementing these strategies, it's going to behoove any sort of decision maker or leader to be able to like build consensus, get people understanding like why we're doing this, how we're doing it, and all that stuff. Because I think I so often sort of zero in on like, all right, this is a cool thing, or this is something we want to do, like, but we have to consider sort of like the ease of implementation because like you're going to have the naysayers, you're going to have the people who are dragging their feet, and like how do we actually sort of follow through? Because like I think the biggest thing that I've seen is like there's so many great like project management tools out there, and a lot of people are like, okay, this is what we're doing, we're using it, whatever. And it's like this only works if everybody kind of like buys in and follows through. Because if we just have a bunch of like random tasks or different things just aren't getting like followed up on, or so I've seen like sometimes like iterations of like, okay, we're gonna try this again, like another new tool. And it's like that. I mean, you could just use the old one if you try to be like, guys, we're gonna do trainings, we're gonna like really put emphasis on it versus just sort of like you cast it out like a dove and it just sort of flies away and you're like, wait, what? Like what? It's like, what
Yeah.
did you expect? It's just gonna fly away. You had no controls on it. You had no like way to sort of like, I don't know. I'm like mixing my metaphors here, but I guess it's just an idea of like really being thoughtful about like strategy here, like with these tools. Because yeah, like any of these tools, as shiny as they are and as much money as you're spending on them and all that, like they're only as good as sort of like, okay, well then like what's net, like how are we using it, how are we sort of following up and assessing it and sort of training people and getting all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I think that's always just helpful to sort of make a point of. But yeah, so you'd kind of alluded to something I wanted to talk about is like sort of a modern student experience really having more personalization, and I think just being more inclusive as kind of a byproduct of that, where like a first generation student who doesn't really know what a college experience is supposed to look like, or has some maybe like erroneous assumptions based on like movies and television shows or whatever, or just anecdotes, by personalizing, I think that's as a really effective way to be more inclusive of those learners. So I think, how do you see the work that your team does, I mean, again, especially through like co-curricular things like presence, but like the work that your team does, like supporting more inclusive campus environments for first generation students? Because I feel like personalization is like a big sort of part of that puzzle.
Yeah, it is. You hit it right. Personalization, right? Like to me, the way I would compact the concept of being inclusive is recognizing the differences in all of us, right? And creating strategies and work that include everybody, and that's extremely different, right? Like difficult rather. You have to understand the levels of complexity that there are for the different experiences people have and make sure that all of those are part of your decision making. So you're right, like the co-curricular space, it's a huge part of our identity and our work is making sure that what we're doing is being understood and measured, and the outcomes are being ranked, and we can take action off of that. And if we notice that we're not including a population, we can start to dig into that data, understand why, and do things differently. But on the personalization side of it, it's doing things differently. That's kind of the key. What does everybody need, and how can I use my limited budget and my limited resources to make sure the things I'm doing don't intentionally or unintentionally exclude some? It also has to do with the way in which a school presents itself, right? Like I think about Omni, our CMS product offers a personalization layer that helps to adjust what a student sees when they're on the website based on who they are. And I think that it's kind of amazing that there aren't a lot of technologies. I actually do not know of another one like that that does what that does. But every single website you go to does that everywhere across the entire internet. They all adapt themselves to you so that you see something that's relevant to you. You talk to your friend about a thing, and all of a sudden your Instagram ads are selling you that thing. You're like, how did this happen? This is amazing, right? But the opposite of that happens in a lot of ed tech where nothing's personalized at all. A student's just a student. Um, and I'm being a little critical, right? Like that's obviously not completely the case, but leaning into personalization and leaning into the use of data, I think, is where we empower ourselves to do a better job of including people. Um, Not everybody's going to be able to empathize with everybody else. We all have our own experiences; those build our biases, and our outlooks on life, and that's okay. That's human. We all work, to get away from that. But institutionally, um, a lot of the work that people do with presence that we've always been the proudest of is loading demographics into the tool and connecting that to co-curricular engagement. And so seeing, this demographic typically doesn't retain well. Oddly enough, they're not building community or connection. What can we do better to better engage with them? And of course, like you can't just survey students to get this data because they don't want to answer surveys. Like you have to get it for them. And there's a study we always cited that shows that like 95% of students want you to do that. They're totally fine with that, right? They already signed their data away. Just use it and give them a better experience. Um, there's also something that has to do with employability, I think, there, right? Like there's a lot of pressure, especially on first gen students to do well. So they need supporting resources, right, when they're in school, and two, to get to the goal, right? They need to graduate, they need to get the job that they were looking for, right? They're a model for their families in a lot of ways, and so making sure that they are the most employable they can be, especially in the traditional undergrad world, is a huge challenge. You've got to make sure that you're not just putting on pizza parties and gaming events and sports games, right? Stuff like that that's sort of generic. Like these people need apprenticeship, workforce enablement, professional skill development, leadership stuff. Super, super important, and it can be difficult to interact with and get to when you're already working a job or two, maybe already have a family. All the challenges that can hit first gens.
Yeah. And like you said, I think that's something else I've been thinking a lot about is how, you know, what people experience in the non-higher ed world. And it's like, that's what they're expecting. And like a personalization is a big part of that. And I think, like you said, like the students enrolling in an institution probably far prefer, they're in platforms and their institutions utilizing that data to make their experience better versus like, I think a lot of us sort of just like bemoan, but accept, the social media giants of the world and all these things, sort of doing like, it's like, all right, fine, whatever. Yeah. Cause I get, good recommendations for, clothes or whatever else, but like, them, providing nudges around tasks and deadlines or providing additional support or whatever, because they can see, levels of activity or inactivity or things like that. And trying to kind of remove all the noise and like, websites anymore for like a lot of institutions have just become just like just these massive unwieldy libraries of like menus of submenus of this or that and what, like, and it's like I don't even know how to find what I'm looking for. But if it's like, yeah, you start to kind of like part things around and it's like, okay, you're a first year business student here, like, well, at least like kind of let the stuff that's probably relevant to you kind of boil up to the top, and then you can kind of go from there. But um yeah, I mean, I think that it is really, really powerful where like something I thought of with like the personalization too, and that like the idea of like, oh, well, we surveyed students what they want, and like, we're trying to like give that to them or whatever. You kind of want them to like show you rather than tell you, where it's like, yeah, they'll say like, oh, I want more of this or less of that. But then it's like, you do it and it doesn't really work out. But if it's like, oh, we're seeing, yeah, like a certain demographic doing this or that, or, this seemed to be really popular. Like that's like the best feedback you can get is like, what do people actually tell you through their actions? Like, what are the roadblocks that they're hitting? And when do they actually like bail out when they're trying to look for information or something? So I think, yeah, like having those insights around, uh, their activity in an LMS, or like, trying to register and they, have difficulties or something, or, um, yeah, any of those sort of things. I think, yeah, that's a great way to be more personalized, and through that being more inclusive of first generation students, because like, you want to be able to kind of cater to their, specific needs as much as possible. Um,
Yeah. I mean,
so yeah.
you might also recognize that you're not going to save everybody. People are gonna stop out. They're going to leave, and there are strategies you can use that are best adapted to the current student to get them back. Right. Like uh, one of our tools does AI blended messaging, where you can run essentially playbooks to re-engage students. We had a school increase enrollment by 400% in that stop out group just by running you know a playbook of really engaging text messages that reach a student where they are and bring them back in. And that, emails and flyers don't do that, right? But just a small adjustment like moving to text instead of those more traditional flows can respect the fact that these students are going to have challenges, but that may not be a permanent thing, right? Maybe they take a semester off. Maybe there's something that gets in their way, and maybe there's something more you can do to keep them connected.
Hmm. Yeah, and that's something I just like love to see, because I think it's such a like mindset shift of like really being open and communicative and supportive of those stop out students. Because like, I mean, there's so many of them. There's so many people with some college and no degree, and some of them, may never come back, or it's going to be a long time. But like, at least trying to keep that connection. I'm just like, that it's good on you, because I think there's some very effective, low cost, manageable, scalable, ways to do that. And like, is it like just texting and keeping in touch, where like, traditionally it's just sort of like, well, we're here if you want to come back, like
Right.
we'll always welcome you. But it's like, do they know how? Like, any of the information that they would need to actually do that? And yeah, just seeing how effective it is, and just I think there's such a huge like ROI on that as well. Just like, even getting a few students back over the course of like an academic year. So yeah, I've always been, a strong proponent and advocate for that sort of stuff. But well, yeah, and I mean, I think you're speaking, to a lot of great things that I think are sort of permeating the higher ed world, which I'm very thankful to see. Are there other innovative strategies that you're tracking on the horizon in terms of ed tech? I think there certainly are some new and interesting things that I'm still making up my opinion how to feel about them, like the metaverse. But yeah, I'm curious from your perspective what you're sort of tracking.
The metaverse.
Yeah.
Not tracking the metaverse. I will admit. Um, I think one of the biggest ones that we're very plugged into because of the scale of our continuing ed solutions is of course like credentialing, micro credentialing, that whole world. I think another like a sub point to the earlier one about higher ed needing to come to grips with the speed of change in the market right now is that micro credentials are good, right? They're effective, they're useful. Employers and employees want them, and it doesn't have to be, you know, go get a micro credential instead of a degree. I think the missing piece of that is those come after or alongside or before degrees and are continuous throughout a learner's whole journey and life cycle, right? Like learning is constant. And if we continue to take the approach of you go get your bachelor's, master's, doctorate, and then that's that, like it's just not the truth anymore. So I think, I mean, you're going to continue to see a huge increase in large scale, like organizations and tool sets that provide and track and make micro-credentialing more accessible and more possible, and hopefully see more and more institutions very quickly adapt to that. It is a really big shift away from the traditional education model. So I think that's a big one. I think we've talked about personalization quite a lot today, and I think that's going to continue. The world is not going to get any less personalized, that's for sure. The amount of data that's being extracted and used is very, very heavy. So I think that the institutions that embrace personalization and products that do that are at the forefront and are going to be successful. I think about Pathify a lot, with the amount of personalization that's there, and some of our products as well, and how that's really what makes the difference, right? Is I'm student of this persuasion. What is my experience? And it's not easy to do. Like it's actually quite difficult technology to figure out who needs what and why and when. But when somebody gets it right, super useful, and you're going to see more and more of that. I would imagine you might even see personalization layers as technology across ed tech, where companies can't do it really well, but other companies can grab data from a bunch of sources and create personalization engines and integrate those into other technologies. It'd be a good idea. I should go make that. And then a lot.
Just make up your own little secret sauce. Yeah.
Right. That's how it just goes in the idea drawer. Investors, please reach out. I kid. Digital engagement, I think, would be the last one I would really think about. We saw, the pandemic did it. We saw that people can be engaged from anywhere and can participate from anywhere, and that they should be able to, and that they want to, and it's important. And the concept of a campus then changes. I think a lot about, I went to community college when I first got into higher ed, and then, did 2 years community college and then moved over. And the thing I learned the most about the culture of the people that I went to school with, who were, everywhere from like 80, to kids that were early out of high school and into community colleges, that they all were busy, but they also all wanted to feel like they were having the college experience. And I think that's the thing to remember when we think about online learners and distance learners and continuing ed learners and hybrid learners, is that, like, what does college mean when you're not physically on a campus, or you can't be all the time? And how do you create, if you can, that college experience? That's a big piece of just the concept of digital engagement and hybrid learning that I think is going to persist.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I appreciate the kudos about Pathify, of course. But yeah, cool. Because I think like that digital engagement piece is certainly something I geek out about a lot too. Like, and we saw, like the pendulum swing all the way to like full digital 100% all the way, because that was all that we had. And then everybody was kind of coming back onto campus. And I think we're going to settle in that like sort of hybrid middle that I've been really trying to kind of process a lot, where like you're going to see where it's like, yeah, we have a great speaker on campus that we live stream, but then we also put the video on demand, and like all these sort of things where it's like, you can watch it if you're not there, you can be in the room if you're able to, but then if you miss it, then you could watch it back 50 times if you want at 1.5 speed. But then you can also like jump into like something like Slack and talk about it either while it's happening or afterwards, or just like those sort of things that create these really like dynamic digital environments that also sort of like supplement or augment or sort of complement the in-person experience. Because like some people are always going to want that, and that's really helpful, but they also may want to be like, well, almost it might be like, yeah, I'll do my first 2 years on campus, and then I'm going to start to kind of like go hybrid, as maybe I hopefully get like credentials along the way as I'm getting towards my bachelor's. I get a job, but I'm still finishing my degree and all that stuff. And yeah, I also geek out about like stackable credentials and those things. Is really cool to see, just because it is like, rather than like all or nothing over 4 or 6 years getting a bachelor's, you can maybe get things along the way, or have that MicroMasters be kind of the gateway to like get maybe like the introductory courses and do them all online. But it's like, what, I do want to become a social worker, but that requires a little bit more sort of like clinical stuff and all this, so then it's like, I'm making that commitment to do all that. But if I just want to do kind of like intro to social work and get sort of like an awareness and those sort of things, I could do that. And then 3 years later, it'd be like, I'm ready to do, all the very intensive immersive parts of this. And they're just like, yeah, you're in, like, you're ready, like, because you've proven that the concepts that are important and those sort of things. So yeah, I mean, that's certainly a really bright future, just in terms of the kind of the inclusivity, the accessibility, and just sort of higher institutions making themselves very relevant and very dynamic, and all those just great action words, I guess. But we will wrap up with the question I love to ask everybody at the end of these episodes. What does a connected campus look and or feel like to you?
Yeah, that is the question, isn't it? Right? Like, it's such a good question to end on, because it really hits all the points we talked about today, oddly enough. And I see it in, like, from two views. One is that it is the work being done, right, in some degree or another across higher ed in the background. A lot of us in the space talk with CIOs and IT verticals and administrators and folks like that all the time. And so there's what we've recommended today, and some of the work that's already happening around putting procedures and communication and strategies and tool sets in place, and eliminating silos that higher ed loves to say they're doing all the time, right? We all talk about silos. We need less of those. And it's like an infrastructure sort of perspective on things, and that's fine. And we need to keep doing that, because some of the technologies in place are just silly old and very difficult to update, right, and to move into this world. But I think the other perspective, and another plug for Pathify, which I'll always make no matter if I'm on a Pathify podcast or not, is that think about the student experience, right? Like, what is it like for a student who is 18 to engage with the digital assets you have? What is that experience? How many clicks? How many different screens do they need to load? Right? That whole thing. Does it feel connected like the rest of their experiences throughout the rest of their life? And if it is not, then that indicates the level of work that there is to do. Right? We must model the way in which people interact with the world, and make sure that we fit into that really well, because I don't think traditional higher ed's going anywhere. Like, I think it can sound scary. I think it's just that there's a new model that's been added into it, and that reflects the way in which students experience things now. So a connected campus to me means that it's actually connected, and that a student certainly feels like it's connected when they're engaging with it. Both difficult things to achieve, but both are possible with enough focus and determination.
Yeah. I like the literal and figurative kind of definition that you provided, because I mean, there's just very practical kind of objective kind of pieces that need to be put into place, and I've started to kind of use that vernacular as well, as kind of the digital infrastructure that an institution sort of needs to put in place that facilitates kind of the kind of soft, mushy, kind of emotional parts of a campus, the sense of belonging and mattering, and those sort of things. And like that feeling that a student has, where kind of like what I'm taking away is like a fluidity, like reducing friction or sort of frustration and those sort of things. So like the connection is that like they're getting what they need when they want it, and just like it feels like everything's kind of seamless in that way. So I think that is a beautiful definition, and I thank you for hanging out and sharing all that you did. And we'll have ways to connect with you and Modern Campus and all the great work that y'all are doing in the show notes for this episode. But just always great talking to you and talking about this stuff.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Dustin. It's been good to catch up with you, and I appreciate the time.
Thanks for listening to The Connected Campus. Please leave a 5-star review for the show and share it so others can discover us. Make sure to also subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you in the next episode of The Connected Campus.